Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another edition of World Talks here on TVP World. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and please join me and my guests on this next interview. As global security dynamics continue to evolve, recent talks in Saudi Arabia involving the US, Ukraine, and Russia, alongside the EU's unveiling of its long-anticipated white paper on defense, signal shifting priorities and alliances. With strategic autonomy on the agenda and questions surrounding NATO cohesion, Europe's defense future is at a turning point. Joining us today on TVP World to break it all down is Gerlinde Niehus, a former Deputy Director for Defense and Security Cooperation at NATO. Now, with years of high-level experience sharing transatlantic policy, Niehus offers our deep insights into European defense strategy, NATO relations, and global security coordination. Hello, ma'am, and welcome to TVP World.
Morning. Good morning from Brussels.
Good morning. Now, before we dive into all of this very kind of complex dynamics of NATO and EU defense as well, I want to get your take overall on the Saudi Arabia talks. Do you think that it's going to move the needle in the Ukraine conflict at this point?
Well, to tell you the truth, I mean, my expectations are very, very low because I believe, and not only me, that Putin is not interested in peace. He's only interested in staying in power. And therefore, I mean, he's not agreeing to the proposed ceasefire. And in essence, I mean, sticking to the conditions which he already presented back in 2021. Yeah. So I do not expect this process to lead to anything which could be called a just and durable peace. It will drag on behind the backs of the Europeans and at the expense of Ukraine. And again, I think the best way really to ensure a just and durable peace for Ukraine is to supply Ukraine with what it needs to win this war on its own terms.
All right. So do you think that going forward, the U.S. will be taking a different position? Because, like you mentioned, this perhaps didn't move the needle that much. Do you expect a different approach towards things going forward?
Well, as I said, I think Russia has in essence not changed its strategy. Putin hasn't changed it. He wants to annihilate Ukraine as an independent sovereign country. He wants to address the so-called root causes, which is sort of Kremlin speak for ultimately having Ukraine neutral and certainly not in NATO. He also wants to push NATO out of Eastern Europe. And Ukraine really maintains its logical key goal, namely to remain as an independent, sovereign and democratic nation. And I mean, Putin, if I put it very blunt, I mean, he seems to share with Trump seems to share with Putin a disdain for international rules and norms. So they seem to connect as two strong men practicing ultimately a Yalta-style policy, carving up the world in spheres of influence. And the US over the past weeks and months have made multiple concessions to Putin to not get much in return. Yeah? And Putin now is playing very skillfully on Donald Trump's vanity and his self-image as a deal maker. So I don't think the US has much of what would be called a strategy. And if anything, it will be at the expense of Ukraine and Europeans.
Right. So with that being said, and the United States still being the leading partner of NATO, perhaps this is why the European Union decided that they would take up more responsibility when it comes to defense. We saw this EU white paper on defense that's finally been released. What stand out most to you in this kind of long-awaited document?
Well, I think, first of all, it's very positive that the EU now has a dedicated defense commissioner, Andris Kubilius, with a very clear sense of urgency and also a very clear strategic vision. And I think this is really reflected in the white paper if you read it. But having said that, of course, we need to be clear that President Putin is not deterred by paper, but only by real military capacities and capabilities. So that's why I think it's useful that the focus of the white paper is on areas where the EU can really provide significant added value. So support Ukraine, which is mentioned as one of the priorities there, and then ramping up European defense industry and defense production, and also investment in defense. So if you wish, the focus of the white paper is on really concrete deliverables. And I think that's also the intention, to focus on implementation and deliverables, and not so much on broader issues of European security architecture.
Right. And like you mentioned, investment in defense has been significantly increased. And this is not just procurement from U.S. weapons, but also a strengthening of Europe's own defense industry. Do you think that also signals the EU's will of having what it's described as strategic autonomy? And perhaps, do you think that might have a little bit of conflict when it comes to NATO cohesion in and of itself?
I don't think there is any conflict with NATO there. In many ways, I think in going forward, the organizations have to build on building a strong synergy between both of them. Yeah. And yes, I mean, in Europe, I mean, we have reaped 3 decades of peace dividend, which led to a complete atrophy of our military capabilities. So we have a long way to catch up. And I mean, I hope now that the Europeans are really taking up this. There's been too much talk about wake-up calls. I mean, we need to take action. I mean, it seems bordering absurd that some 500 million Europeans ask some 340 million Americans to protect them against some 140 million Russians who have not been able to win a war against less than 40 million Ukrainians. So in many ways, what I'm saying is, in Europe, Europeans, we do have the resources. What we were lacking over past decades was the political will and the leadership and determination to get things done. But I think now, at least that's the symptoms, the indicators I'm getting from Europeans. There are at least several initiatives underway which hopefully will build that, provided that they are being implemented.
Right. Now, with the United States perhaps changing its stance on its engagement within NATO, do you believe that the European Union and its new defense strategy will start to take center stage and be the one that's being prioritized when it comes to European defense, instead of trying to, again, rely on NATO and American help?
Well, I think the European Union still looks at NATO as the provider of the collective defense. That is also what is still mentioned in this white paper. Now, having said that, on the NATO side, of course, NATO is amidst a new existential crisis. Let's be clear here, yeah. And Donald Trump has repeatedly unleashed criticism on NATO, put its bedrock Article 5 into question, repeatedly said that he wouldn't wouldn't defend allies who are not paying 2% of GDP for defense. So a scenario where the US would either significantly scale down its activities in its engagement in NATO, or even leave, is nothing which can be ruled out. And I do believe that on the NATO side, they would be well advised to not only rely on the Secretary General's talent as a Trump whisperer to keep the US in, but to prepare for all eventualities. And as I said, I mean, the best scenario for NATO and Europeans would probably be a staged and a phased scenario where Europeans would take on more of strategic responsibility. I don't like the term autonomy because I think it is unuseful. So more strategic responsibility. But having said that, I think NATO also needs to prepare for a worst-case scenario. And the worst-case scenario would be a withdrawal from the US, in the most extreme case, including its nuclear umbrella. And I think on the NATO side, we would be well advised to not put our heads in the sand and behave like an ostrich. I mean, we must be clear-eyed of what is possible and think it through.
Thank you so much for helping us break that all down. Really appreciate it. Thanks for your input and insight, and thanks for being with us on TVP World.
My pleasure. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
And thank you for tuning into this edition of World Talks. For more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.